American comic. I have all the skills from Warcraft 3. Chapter 61. Actually, I really don't know where Drakov is, but I have a way for you to see him, but it requires this idiot's cooperation. Inside the ruins, Melina looked at her completely destroyed cottage, sighed, and then told Rosen and Natasha that she had secretly informed Drakov to send people to arrest Alexei. The idiot she referred to was, of course, Alexei, who was sleeping soundly on the ground. The slap Natasha delivered with her mech fan, though not at full strength, was still quite painful. Without his shield, relying solely on his super soldier physique to take the hit, while not severely injuring him, definitely required him to sleep for a while. Can you convince him? Rosen glanced at Alexei, then asked. As an important character in the Black Widow storyline and one of the future members of the Thunderbolts, Alexei was clearly not among those who could be controlled by a talisman. It's probably not easy. That guy still thinks Drakov is his old buddy. Even if he gets caught, his brain probably won't process it for a while. Melina shook her head. Her plan was actually very simple: have Alexei cooperate by being captured and go with her to Drakov's lair. Drakov would definitely meet with her then. And she would leave a contingency on the captured Alexei. Then, as long as Alexei cooperated by using her contingency to escape control, he could provide Rosen and Natasha with his location. There's no need to make it so complicated, just take this with you when you go to see Drakov. After hearing Melina's plan, Rosen shook his head and then pulled out a tiny mouse, handing it to her. It was a mechanical animal from the mall. What a joke! With his abilities, why would he need such a complicated plan? As long as a mechanical animal entered Drakov's lair, how is that any different from him going in himself? This is a bionic robot animal. At first, Melina was a bit confused, but after taking the mouse in her hand, she felt something was off. This mouse was not real, it was a bionic robot animal. She had never seen such an exquisite and lifelike bionic robot animal. If she hadn't held it in her hand and actually felt the internal mechanical parts through its fur, she wouldn't have been able to tell it was fake just by looking at it. That's right. As long as you take it with you, I can track your movements, and you don't have to worry about it being detected for any signal devices, because my method of locating doesn't use signal positioning. Rosen said, there are no explosives in its body either. No matter how it's tested, it will only ever be an ordinary mechanical mouse. Although the structure of the mechanical animal was mechanical, its essence leaned more towards a magic creation. It belonged to magic technology. Its means of monitoring and transmitting vision naturally couldn't operate through electronic signals, but through magic. With Rosen's current mastery of engineering combined with magic, he could actually create similar products. However, the mechanical animals produced by the system were more reliable in performance, looked more real, and were more lifelike. In contrast, the mechanical animals Rosen made himself had a smaller observable range, looked a bit duller, and couldn't be as intelligent as the system-produced mechanical animals, which could perfectly mimic the original habits of animals. It was fine if they appeared alone, but if placed with real animals, the difference would be easily spotted. Plus, the system's mechanical animals weren't expensive. So, unless absolutely necessary, Rosen preferred to spend money to buy system products rather than waste time and materials making them himself. If what you say is true, then there's no problem, but you must be quick. My meeting with Drakov won't last long, and he'll have other Black Widow guards around him. If you can't corner him quickly, with his vigilance, he'll quickly relocate. In that case, finding him again will be very difficult. Hearing Rosen speak with such certainty, Melina naturally didn't refute anything. Bringing a mouse with her to see Drakov wasn't a difficult task given her status in the Red Room. She could simply say she had developed new technology that she needed to show Drakov. So she merely reminded Rosen that he had to act quickly when the time came. Don't worry, the speed at which we appear will definitely exceed your imagination. Rosen, upon hearing this, didn't explain what teleportation magic was to Melina, but simply exchanged a smile with Natasha. And Melina, seeing their confidence, could only choose to believe them. Oh, my head really hurts. Wait, what's going on with you two, just now? Just then, Alexei, who had been knocked out, woke up, clutching his head and looking at Natasha and Melina, who were standing together in a harmonious atmosphere, with confusion in his eyes. Was that fight just now a dream? Looking at his foolish expression, Melina and Natasha exchanged glances and couldn't help but sigh in unison. Should they just kill him instead? In the end, Rosen made his move, with a slight wave of his hand. As the sleep skill was cast, Alexei's eyes, which had begun to clear, became hazy again, and then he fell to the ground with a thud, once again falling into a deep sleep. And unlike his previous unconsciousness, this time he was snoring loudly. Natasha, who was already used to this, showed no change in expression. Melina, however, saw this and her pupils slightly contracted. For a super agent, this ability to easily induce sleep was truly too heaven-defying. For agents, a target put to sleep was basically no different from a dead person. Of course, this was limited to ordinary people. They'll be here soon. Natasha and I will leave first, the rest is up to you. After putting Alexei to sleep, Rosen said to Melina. The Warhawk on alert in the sky had already detected several aircraft heading towards their location. Clearly, these were the people sent by Dreykov. Now at level 3, the Warhawk's vision had reached an astonishing 160 kilometers, and it also possessed the ability to stealth. Coupled with its own stealth-breaking ability, it was essentially a super stealth biological early warning aircraft. So now, unless the opponent also possessed abilities like instantaneous movement, it was impossible to ambush Rosen. They would even be ambushed by Rosen in return. After Rosen and Natasha left, Melina stood quietly in place, waiting for Dreykov's people to arrive. An hour later, Melina, accompanied by the still unconscious Alexei, arrived at Dreykov's hidden location, which was also the main base of the Red Room, under the escort of a group of armed soldiers from the Red Room. It was not the Sky Fortress from the Black Widow storyline. Due to the timeline, although construction of the Sky Fortress had begun, it was still far from completion. At this time, the Red Room headquarters was located in an abandoned space base left behind by the Soviets in Ukraine. And as Melina met Dreykov, before the big villain could even greet Melina, with a flash of white light, Rosen and Natasha appeared before Dreykov. So you're Dreykov, Rosen said, looking at the old man in front of him with a half smile. With Rosen taking action, Dreykov and his personal guards were subdued without making any fuss. After gaining control of Dreykov, Rosen began to take over the entire Red Room. The high-ranking officials at the Red Room headquarters received individual orders and entered Dreykov's office one by one. And were planted with talismans by Rosen. The entire process went smoothly, and no one grew suspicious. After all, this was Dreykov's habit, he never met more than one high-ranking official at a time. This habit, which might normally prevent subordinates from colluding or being ambushed, now made things easier for Rosen. Subsequently, with the cooperation of these high-ranking officials and the two insiders familiar with the Red Room, Natasha and Melina, Rosen successfully took control of the entire base. The entire process took less than a day. The remaining peripheral high-ranking officials and field agents not at the base will gradually return to the base in the coming period to fall under Rosen's control. And after all this was completed, it was time for Dreykov's reckoning. Ultimately, Dreykov died at the hands of a group of Black Widows led by Natasha. Because of his cruel rule, all the Black Widow agents in the Red Room, except for the internal security forces that formed the basis of his rule, hated him. So, this villain, who could be considered a formidable figure, didn't even leave a complete corpse. There were too many Black Widow trainees at the base. Even if each person only took one cut, there wasn't much left of Dreykov's flesh. During this period, Rosen also met Yelena. Yelena was just 18 years old. And like Natasha, she was the top Black Widow agent of her cohort and was about to graduate. If Rosen had arrived a few months later, she would have undergone the final Black Widow surgery, just like Natasha once did. But clearly, she was lucky. After their reunion, Melina took her two adopted daughters to have a heart-to-heart talk. Meanwhile, Rosen began to inventory the legacy Dreykov left behind. The most important part, of course, was the Black Widow agents. Good heavens, there are actually so many Black Widows. Rosen was stunned when he saw the dense list of names in the Red Room headquarters system records. Although he knew the number of Black Widow agents wouldn't be small, as at least dozens had appeared in the movies alone. Plus, Dreykov had secretly developed them for so many years. So, Rosen had thought the total number of Black Widow agents would be several hundred at least. However, after seeing the list, Rosen had to admit he was still naive. Because the number displayed on the system was a staggering 12,000 people. They were widely distributed across the world, even in Asia, which Rosen thought was outside the Red Room's operational scope. The number was considerable. Of course, as Rosen learned after browsing, these Black Widows were not limited to core agents like Natasha who were in their prime. Instead, they covered the entire age range. Although Dreykov had only been in charge of the Red Room for just over 40 years, including the Soviet era. But the Red Room, like SHIELD, was established as early as World War II, although it was a subordinate department of Leviathan, and the number of agents trained in the early days was not large. Yet, over the years, it had accumulated a large number of Black Widow agents. Because Black Widow agents are not like typical intelligence agencies with a concept of retirement, it's a lifelong system. Coupled with Dreykov's continuous expansion after taking control of the Red Room. This led to such a terrifying number. Thus, among this list of over 12,000 people, the oldest was a staggering 76 years old, whose public identity was a widowed old lady living in Massachusetts. And like her, nearly 10,000 people were lurking around the world under ordinary identities. They were in various countries and industries. Many of them had even infiltrated various official agencies. Even SHIELD had 3, though their ranks were not high. The CIA and FBI had quite a few, and their positions were not low. Especially the CIA, which had over 200 people. However, the largest number was in European countries, as this was the Red Room's base. Since all these individuals had single-line contact with the Red Room headquarters. Without an activation order, they would not actively perform any tasks, so the possibility of being discovered was extremely low. Even if discovered, it would generally not implicate the Red Room, and would only be considered remnants from the Soviet era. Only the remaining 2,000-plus people were the main force Dreykov usually used to carry out various missions. However, perhaps it was precisely the support and assistance of these nearly 10,000 lurking Black Widows scattered across the world that allowed the Red Room to remain undetected by other forces in the more than 10 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. This guy's ambition is truly not small, but now, all of this benefits me. Rosen looked at the data on the computer, very satisfied. With these Black Widows lurking around the world, it would be much more convenient for Rosen to handle matters wherever he went in the future. Because all the lists of lurking Black Widows were categorized by the country and force they infiltrated. So, it was very convenient for Rosen to check. Soon, a separate list caught Rosen's attention. Good heavens, there are Black Widow people in Hydra. And 5 of them. Svetlana Barakova, Sokovia Senator, Hydra high-ranking official, senior cadre under warlord Wolfgang von Strucker. Maria Gomez, mid-level cadre under Wolfgang von Strucker. Severina Bishop, codename Banshee, president of the Malik Family Chemical Company. Teresa Cassidy, codename Banshee, Hydra Arctic Research Base researcher, Superior Alexander Pierce. Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, former Leviathan high-ranking official, Hydra member, chairman of Oakhaven Group, Superior Alexander Pierce. Good heavens, 2 affiliated with Strucker, 1 from the Malik family, and 2 affiliated with Alexander Pierce. This directly brought together 3 Hydra heads. And while the first 4 were fine, the 5th name truly startled Rosen. Isn't this the Countess who will form the Thunderbolts in the future? She's actually a Red Room person too. Good heavens, no wonder this person could so easily find Yelena, Alexei, and Taskmaster in the future, recruit them, and know them so well. When Rosen watched the movie, he marveled that out of a total of 5 members in the Thunderbolts, Red Room members accounted for 3. But now, with the Countess being a Black Widow, and a Black Widow from the Leviathan era, and also Hydra, then it all makes perfect sense. It seems after returning to the United States, Rosen will have to have a good talk with this Countess. Rosen stayed at the Red Room headquarters for over half a month, and after successively marking the high-ranking officials of its affiliated forces and the field agents who returned with talismans, the entire Red Room was officially declared to have changed ownership. Subsequently, Rosen handed over the remaining specific matters to Melina. At the same time, he fulfilled his promise to Natasha by entrusting Yelena to her care, and sent back all the children who had just been brought into the Red Room but had not yet undergone Black Widow training. These children were generally young and had no concept of the Red Room whatsoever, not even knowing its name. Therefore, Rosen was not worried that they would leak any information. As for handing the Red Room over to Melina, there was no need to worry about her ambition growing or her playing tricks. Although she herself was an important Destiny character whom Rosen could not control with a talisman, the other high-ranking officials of the Red Room were not. So, in essence, she was only responsible for the specific execution of headquarters affairs and managing miscellaneous tasks when Rosen was not present. If there was anything particularly important, the other high-ranking officials could directly contact Rosen. Her greater responsibility was to continue her original research, which was the Red Room's new headquarters, the Sky Fortress, currently under construction. And the human genome map, that is, the serum seen in the movie that could be used to control people. For Rosen himself, this serum might not be very useful due to the existence of his talisman abilities. But for the Black Widow agents of the Red Room, it was a very effective weapon. In addition, Rosen also handed over the 15 super spiders he had acquired from Toby's Spider-Man world to Melina for research. After completing all this, Rosen sent Natasha and Yelena back to Toby's Spider-Man world. He himself went to Sokovia alone. Upon arriving in this country, Rosen also witnessed what chaos truly meant. Rosen had been to chaotic areas before. Hell's Kitchen in New York and the northern regions of Mexico could be considered typical chaotic zones. But compared to Sokovia, they were completely insignificant. After all, while those two places were chaotic, in most cases, it was just a matter of drawing guns and shooting. Rocket launchers and machine guns were generally the heaviest firepower. Even northern Mexico, which had an armed force comparable to a regular army, with a few armored vehicles or armed helicopters, was pretty much at its peak. A fun fact, the official Mexican army has no tanks, and its most advanced weapons are 4 second-generation F-5 fighter jets. In contrast, although Sokovia is a very small country in Europe, in this country, you can see Leopard 2 tanks and M1A1 tanks blasting each other on the streets. F-16 fighter jets and Su-27s dogfighting in the sky. The infantry weapons among the various warlords were even more diverse. A small country actually gathered more than a dozen warlords, which greatly opened Rosen's eyes. However, thinking about it, it was not surprising. After all, the warlords in this country were basically controlled by Hydra, and they could even obtain advanced weapons produced by Stark Industries. Let alone these ordinary weapons. But what truly surprised Rosen even more were the residents of Sokovia. Tanks were blasting each other on the street. The roadside cafes were still operating as usual. The young people had all fled, but a few elderly people were still leisurely drinking coffee. It was simply absurd. Fortunately, Rosen was not an ordinary person. Otherwise, it would have been truly difficult to operate in this chaotic country. Soon, Rosen arrived at the territory of one of the warlords and silently entered a luxurious villa. However, the villa's master was not home, only some soldiers guarding it and a few maids. Seeing this, Rosen unceremoniously controlled all these people and then acted like a big master in the house. It wasn't until evening that a bulletproof luxury car drove into the villa. A middle-aged beautiful woman, dressed in a suit and elegantly poised, stepped out of the car. She was the Red Room's deep-cover agent in Sokovia, and also a key subordinate of Baron Strucker, Svetlana Barakova. Make me a cup of coffee and bring it to my room, I want to take a bath first. Barakova habitually handed her briefcase to a maid nearby, while instructing her. However, the maid's reply was beyond her expectation. Madam, the master is waiting for you in the study, please go there immediately. The maid said. Master. What are you talking about? Barakova's gaze instantly became extremely sharp, looking at her trusted maid. It should be known that these maids in the villa were all orphans she had adopted and raised since childhood, not only maids but also her personal guards, and even loyal to the death. But what was she saying now? Master. This was a title she had never even used. And waiting for her in the study. She subconsciously reached for her waist. Madam, please do not act rashly, the master will be displeased. Another maid held a gun and pressed it against Barakova's back from behind, quickly disarming her. At the same time, several other maids also walked over from all directions, subtly surrounding her. All right, all right, all right. I want to see what could make all of you betray me. Barakova said with an extremely gloomy expression. The current situation was against her, so she could only obey for now. Soon, led by the maids, she arrived at what was originally her study before today. Upon entering the study, Barakova saw a young man sitting in a chair, flipping through her documents. Who are you? Barakova couldn't help but ask. Rosen looked at her upon hearing this, said nothing, and simply tossed out half a coin. Barakova subconsciously caught it, and upon seeing it, her pupils involuntarily constricted. Because this half coin was the Red Room's token used to activate her, a deep cover Black Widow. Unlike the Red Room's regular peripheral forces and field agents, who could be contacted and summoned through various communication methods, all deep cover agents needed to be activated with a special activation command before they would be deployed. The activation command for each deep cover agent was different. It could be a token, or it could simply be a passphrase. And these activation commands were only known by the high-ranking officials directly managing these agents, and Drakov himself. Therefore, when Rosen took control of the Red Room headquarters previously, these deep-cover Black Widow agents were not included among the controlled high-ranking officials and agents. So, at this time, Barakova was unaware that the Red Room had changed ownership. However, with Rosen holding the activation token, it meant that from now on, Rosen was her direct superior. Greetings, Officer, Agent Svetlana Barakova reporting for duty. Barakova immediately saluted Rosen. Inside the study, Barakova was observing Rosen, and Rosen was also observing her. From the moment she walked into the study, Rosen had already realized that she could not be controlled by the talisman. Rosen was not too surprised by this. Because when he took over the Red Room before, Rosen had already discovered that among the Black Widow agents, a portion of them could not be controlled by the talisman. Of course, the number was very small. Out of more than 2,000 people, only 20 could achieve this. The proportion might not seem low, but one must know that those more than 2,000 Black Widow agents were themselves geniuses selected by the Red Room through big data screening. So, this proportion was actually very, very low. And these uncontrollable Black Widow agents, whether in terms of intelligence or strength, were a notch or even more above the other Black Widows. Although the training for Black Widow agents was strict, it didn't mean that all agents who passed the training and assessment were equally strong. It was also possible that some simply possessed a particular advantage in one area and successfully maximized that advantage, thereby becoming qualified Black Widows. But compared to those top-tier and well-rounded agents, they were quite weak. It's like students being categorized as average, good, or excellent. Agents also have similar classifications. This situation wasn't unique to the Red Room. SHIELD, the CIA, and other intelligence agencies were all like this. And often, this latter group of agents made up the vast majority. This difference might not be obvious in everyday life. But when carrying out missions, the difference would become very clear. Barakova, currently before him, clearly belonged to that very small group of super geniuses. Otherwise, why would most undercover Black Widows merely be office workers or ordinary civil servants? Yet Barakova could rise to become a Hydra high-ranking official, Strucker's confidant, and a warlord senator in Sokovia. And she also commanded a formidable armed force. This was the difference in ability. And it was precisely this difference in ability that made Rosen not intend to treat Barakova as a simple tool, like other ordinary Black Widows. Let me introduce myself. My name is Rosen, the new master of the Red Room. Rosen said. Hearing Rosen's words, Barakova, who had initially thought he was just there to assign a mission, was startled, then narrowed her eyes. She quickly began calculating the gains and losses in her mind. She had found it strange earlier why her superior would send a young Asian cadre to activate her. Although there were Asian agents in the Red Room, there were almost no Asians among the middle and high-ranking officials, and such young cadres were even rarer. Of course, she hadn't returned to the Red Room headquarters in over a decade, so even if she found it a bit strange, she would only keep it to herself. After all, the activation token he brought was correct. Moreover, She was an undercover agent of the Red Room, that was true. But to say she was loyal to the Red Room, that was pure nonsense. Especially after rising to her current position, she also had her own ambitions. It was only out of fear of the Red Room's power and secrecy, and the fact that the Red Room possessed all her past information, that she hadn't directly left the Red Room, just like other Black Widows, who knew their own strength and thus were even more wary of the Red Room that had trained them. But now, he was actually telling her that the Red Room had changed hands. However, Barakova immediately thought of the changes in her maids. He possessed such terrifying abilities, controlling the Red Room didn't seem so strange. So, Dreykov is dead? Barakova asked after thinking it through. That's right, dismembered by the Black Widows. It was quite gruesome. I imagine, as a member of the Black Widows, you wouldn't have any strange ideas about avenging him, would you? Rosen said with a shrug. At least so far, Rosen had not heard of any Black Widow agent, or even any of Dreykov's former confidants, expressing a desire to avenge him. It only showed that the man truly had no humanity to speak of. Of course, I only regret not getting a piece of him. My respected new master, have you come to give me a mission this time? Barakova suddenly smiled charmingly, then elegantly walked around the desk and approached Rosen, asking. Rosen did not stop or guard against Barakova's actions. If it had been before going to Mexico, Rosen might have been somewhat cautious, although even then, he already possessed the Watcher template, and his physical fitness far exceeded that of a super soldier. But he still wasn't invulnerable to theft or poison. But now, moreover, he now also possessed a bunch of aura skills. Just one aura of devotion brought his physical defense to a terrifying level. What's more, he also had the Thorn's aura skill. Thorn's aura reflects 30% of melee damage back to the enemy. This was almost like wearing a weakened vibranium suit. You punch me, whether you can break my defense is another matter, but you'll definitely suffer 30% of that punch's force reflected back. So, melee, sneak attacks, could Rosen be afraid? Did they really think that just because he cosplayed as a prophet or a magic user, he was truly squishy? Didn't they know that what mages were best at was melee combat? It was a pity, however, that the sneak attack Rosen hoped for did not happen. Barakova not only did not launch a sneak attack but instead acted quite submissively. She even began to actively offer extra services to Rosen, her new master. Rosen was somewhat surprised by this but did not refuse. Barakova was not young, similar in age to Melina, but her looks were even more striking. And as a politician and warlord, Barakova exuded even more of the unique aura of a strong woman. It easily gave one a special desire for conquest. And Barakova's choice was actually not surprising. She was a Black Widow agent, true, but her long military and political career had made her thinking more inclined towards that of a politician. Rosen's abilities, and his control over the Red Room, made him, in Barakova's eyes, an excellent target to win over. Leaving aside everything else, just Rosen's ability to control people, helping her unify all of Sokovia and replace Strucker as the leader of his branch of Hydra, wouldn't that just be a matter of time? Hiss, worthy of a national warlord, quite the operator. Actually, coming to you this time isn't for anything particularly big, I just need to use your forces to help me find 3 people. Rosen watched Barakova, listening to his orders while displaying her superb political skills, and couldn't help but gasp, speaking with an amazed tone. And the people Rosen was looking for were the siblings Wanda and Pietro. As well as Helmut Zemo. According to the clues Rosen knew, the siblings should be 18 years old by now, but they should not yet have joined Hydra's human experiments, as that was after the Battle of New York, when Hydra obtained the Mind Stone. So, at this time, the siblings should still be wandering among the common people of Sokovia. As for Helmut Zemo, he was probably still serving in a special forces unit under some warlord. Rosen and Barakova had a very pleasant exchange. Barakova expressed her admiration for Rosen as her powerful and mysterious superior. Rosen, in turn, showed great appreciation for Barakova's superb finesse. Of course, after their discussion, while Barakova accepted Rosen's mission, she didn't forget to mention her own humble ambitions. In principle, I agree with your idea, but in terms of execution, some adjustments are needed. Rosen said after a moment of thought, facing Barakova's request for help. Unifying Sokovia is not a problem, but becoming the leader of Hydra is unnecessary, because in my plan, Strucker is still useful, and some things need him to take the blame, and I imagine you certainly wouldn't want a bunch of freaks showing up at your door, Rosen said. Just as he had taken over the Red Room, he also wanted Hydra. But just like Drakov, he didn't want the current heads of Hydra. However, he wouldn't directly eliminate these heads. Instead, he planned to use them as targets to attract the attention of the superheroes. Among the Avengers, superheroes, the young Black Widow, under his influence, basically no longer had any thoughts of becoming a superhero and saving the world. But the others wouldn't change so easily. Even Tony, who had received his favor, was the same. So, with Fury, that meddling stick, pulling the strings, the Avengers would probably still be formed. And to prevent these people from focusing their attention on him, Rosen felt that some targets were still needed to draw their attention. And clearly, early Hydra was undoubtedly the most suitable target. So, what Rosen had to do in the coming period was to gradually infiltrate Hydra, sideline the old heads, and drive these old heads to take the fall for him in the future. Once the old heads were taken down as bosses, Rosen could control Hydra and return it to the underground. As for whether the Avengers would continue to dig deeper after dealing with the old Hydra, Rosen wasn't worried. After all, there were so many crises in this world, and it was simply too easy to find things for the superheroes to do. Not to mention, just the existence of the Skrulls, once revealed, would be enough to keep the Avengers busy for a while. At that time, with the temperaments of the Avengers, would Fury still want to command the Avengers? His official position might not even be secure. And without Natasha, that important mediator, who knew what direction the Avengers would take. So, Rosen also revealed SHIELD's Avengers plan to Barakova. I see, I understand. I will arrange everything to ensure that S.H.I.E.L.D. and that so-called Avengers firmly believe that eliminating Strucker means eliminating Hydra in Sokovia, Barakova said, enlightened, after hearing Rosen's words. She had ambitions, true, but she wasn't foolish. If, as Rosen said, Hydra would eventually clash with S.H.I.E.L.D. and that alliance of freaks, then her stepping into the forefront too early would clearly not be a good thing. She wasn't Tony Stark, she only wanted power and profit, not the spotlight. As long as power and profit were secured, staying behind the scenes wasn't a bad thing either. By the way, you should know Maria Gomez, right? Rosen asked Barakova after saying what needed to be said. Barakova, borrowing the setting and image of the cursed female president from Resident Evil. Maria Gomez, from Resident Evil, Vendetta's female antagonist, borrowing her setting. Of course, she's also Strucker's person, but under another cadre. We don't get along very well. Barakova nodded, and a figure in a leather vest with a hot body immediately appeared in her mind. Although the other party's status was lower than hers, she was still a colleague and rival, so she naturally knew her. She is also one of us. This is her activation token. From now on, she will be under your command. A pen cap appeared out of thin air in Rosen's hand, which he handed to Barakova. Almost all undercover Black Widows maintained single-line contact. Moreover, Barakova and Maria Gomez were not from the same period, and their superiors were also different. So even though they were both in Sokovia, the two didn't know each other, let alone that the other was also a Red Room agent. Hearing Rosen's words, Barakova was very surprised. She really hadn't expected that capable little commodity was one of their own. And while surprised, she was also quite pleased. She and Maria Gomez had never gotten along, and now the other party had suddenly fallen into her hands. Hee. Looking at Rosen beside her, a plan emerged in her mind. Although she had already expressed her loyalty to Rosen with her body, she felt it wasn't enough. And now, Maria Gomez was clearly a very good tool to curry favor with Rosen. Rosen's age, and his performance just now, all proved that this new master was someone who liked to eat meat, and had astonishing energy. So she believed that Rosen would definitely like this gift. Moreover, few men could refuse a woman of Maria Gomez's beauty. Thank you for your trust, master. I will go and relay your instructions below. Barakova happily took the token, then got up, dressed, washed up, and hurriedly left the villa to complete the task Rosen had assigned. Finding someone was actually very simple. Barakova, as a warlord and senator, wasn't just for show. A few phone calls and instructions would suffice. So her main purpose in leaving the villa was actually to activate her fellow agent, Maria Gomez, as soon as possible. And by the time she returned to Rosen's side, it was over an hour later. And she wasn't alone, the activated Maria Gomez had also come along. Why did you bring her back? What if it raises suspicion? Seeing Maria Gomez, Rosen couldn't help but frown slightly, saying to Barakova with some displeasure. Of course, he was just using this as an excuse. Mainly, he didn't like such self-initiated actions from his subordinates. Officer, Maria Gomez reporting to you. Upon seeing Rosen, Maria Gomez immediately saluted. Master, don't worry. I only found out after I laid my cards on the table with Maria that her superior had actually been sidelined by her a long time ago. Maria has already become the de facto controller of that branch of Hydra, but because the other party is Strucker's confidant, she allowed him to remain in that position. Of course, the other party hasn't discovered the fact that he has been sidelined. Barakova quickly explained upon hearing this. Hearing her say that, Rosen's expression softened a little. Don't let it happen again. I don't like this kind of self-initiated behavior, understand? Rosen warned. Yes, master. Barakova's heart also tightened upon hearing this. Her long-term life in a position of power had indeed made her somewhat overlook some of the details that a subordinate needed to pay attention to. Master, there's another reason I brought Mary here. The brother and sister pair you mentioned still haven't been found, but another person, Helmut Zemo, is Mary's subordinate. Seeing that Rosen didn't pursue her previous issue, Barakova finally breathed a sigh of relief and continued to explain. Yes, Master, Zemo is a squad commander in my special forces. He's quite capable. May I ask why you're looking for him? Mary also nodded in confirmation, and like Barakova, changed her address for Rosen from officer to master. Although she was still a little reluctant, before coming, she had already learned from Barakova the fact that the Red Room had changed hands. Without knowing Rosen's personality or preferences, following Barakova, her senior, was always the safe bet. Rosen didn't pay much attention to the change in Mary's address. During his time in the Red Room, there were many Black Widows with similar thoughts to Barakova. This kept Rosen very busy. If his physique wasn't strong enough now, he really wouldn't have been able to handle it. As for the addresses, they were even more varied, so he had long since become desensitized. At this moment, he was marveling at how small the world was. Before coming, he had considered recruiting Zemo, only to find out that Zemo was a subordinate of his subordinate. How is his loyalty? Rosen asked after a few seconds of reflection. He's quite loyal, and from what I understand, he's a very family-oriented person. Mary initially didn't understand why Rosen was looking for her subordinate, but when she heard Rosen ask about loyalty, she realized that her new master likely wanted to recruit Zemo, so she revealed Zemo's weakness. She was somewhat puzzled by this. Because in her opinion, although Zemo's abilities were good, they shouldn't have been enough to warrant the Red Room's master personally coming to recruit him. It wasn't just Mary who was puzzled, Barakova actually had similar thoughts. It's not surprising, after all, they didn't have Rosen's God's eye view. Since he's your subordinate, let him continue to work under the two of you for now. He can be cultivated well in the future, Rosen said after thinking for a moment. As for his family, consult his personal opinion, they can be sent to the United States or other politically stable countries to live. Afterward, depending on the situation, he can be given more family leave. Although Rosen had the intention of recruiting Zemo, he currently didn't have any suitable work for Zemo in the short term. Since that was the case, it was better to let him continue to work under Barakova and Mary. Yes, master, we will cultivate him well. As for sending his family to live in other countries, I believe he won't refuse. Most people in this country are constantly thinking about escaping it. Barakova and Mary exchanged glances before answering. At the same time, they confirmed something in their hearts. Zemo's importance in Rosen's eyes was quite high. As for sending family members to other politically stable countries, as they said, most ordinary people in Sokovia would not refuse. After all, this country was simply too chaotic. No one knew if they would wake up tomorrow after going to sleep today. Just like the calm citizens Rosen had seen earlier in the face of armed conflict, were they really not afraid? No, they knew that fear was useless, they were simply numb. Only those warlords and criminal groups would like it here. But similarly, it was almost impossible for ordinary people to leave this country. Internally, there were warlords and various criminal groups who needed them to work like oxen and horses and would not let them leave. Externally, neighboring countries and even the NATO bloc had set up numerous checkpoints at the country's borders, preventing them from leaving. However, for a powerful warlord like Barakova, sending a family to another country was a piece of cake. After all, even setting aside the Hydra connection, behind warlords like Barakova, there were still the shadows of those international arms dealers. Oh, and if he chooses to send his family to the US, remember not to arrange for them to be in New York. Rosen added after this matter was settled. After all, in a few years, there would be an interstellar defense war there, and it wouldn't be safe at all. As for preventing the Battle of New York, with Rosen's arrival in this universe, he certainly wouldn't stand by and watch some major events, like Ultron, happen again. After all, he couldn't guarantee whether the Ultron of this world would become Infinite Ultron, so it's better for that thing not to appear. Vision is the same. But the Battle of New York cannot be avoided, the reason is simple. If there was no Battle of New York, Rosen would only be able to get the Mind Stone by taking it from Thanos himself. For his own sake, Rosen would definitely actively change the course of this world, but that doesn't mean he has to inexplicably increase the difficulty for himself. The next day, Mary found Zemo according to Rosen's instructions. Without the slightest hesitation, Zemo agreed to send his family away from this irredeemable country. And Barakova's efficiency was also very good. After Zemo, in just 2 days, she found the brother and sister pair, Wanda and Pietro, hidden in the slums and struggling to survive. When Rosen saw the brother and sister pair, they had already cleaned up and were frantically eating a lavish meal, arranged by Barakova. The brother and sister pair were the same age as Yelena, both had just turned 18 this year. However, compared to Yelena, who, despite arduous training in the Red Room, had no worries about food and clothing and looked incredibly healthy. Pietro and Wanda at this time looked very thin and haggard. They also lacked the dashing and unrestrained demeanor they had when they first appeared in the movie with their superpowers. Especially Wanda, she was nowhere near as plump as in the movie, a complete scrawny girl. The brother and sister pair had previously lived by stealing and swindling, basically eating one meal and missing the next, so their condition isn't very good. However, after a doctor's examination, they are generally healthy, with no major illnesses. With good recuperation, they can easily recover. Barakova gave Rosen a brief overview of the brother and sister pair's previous living situation. And listening to Barakova's narration, as well as the brother and sister pair's sallow and emaciated appearance, he suddenly understood why the brother and sister pair hated Tony so much. If Rosen had lived a few years like the brother and sister pair, he would have hated Tony just as much. This hatred was not just because of the bomb that destroyed their lives. It was also a spiritual sustenance in the cruel world, a struggle for survival. Soon, the brother and sister pair, full and satisfied, were brought before Rosen. At this moment, the brother and sister pair were very uneasy. Pietro was even more wary of everything around him, instinctively shielding his sister behind him. Although they were the people Rosen wanted. Barakova's subordinates were clearly not too polite when bringing them back. While no violence was used, there was certainly a degree of threat. So, even though Barakova later arranged good food and drink for them, it still couldn't make the brother and sister pair completely let down their guard. Rosen didn't care about the brother and sister pair's wariness and began to introduce himself. Let me introduce myself, my name is Rosen. You might not believe it, but I am indeed a magic user. Rosen said, and the staff of Antonidas appeared in his hand out of thin air. With a slight wave, a water elemental nearly 3 meters tall gradually condensed into form in the air. A level 3 water elemental, just its massive size, was very intimidating. Not to mention the brother and sister pair, who were completely stunned, even Barakova was shocked. Although she had seen many wondrous things from Rosen in the past few days, she had always thought of them as some kind of superpower. But now Rosen was saying it was magic, and he even summoned a water giant. At this moment, she felt her worldview crumbling. How about it? Isn't it amazing? However, Rosen didn't have time to focus on her at this moment. Instead, he asked the brother and sister pair, who were also stunned, with a gentle expression. It is indeed amazing, but what does this have to do with you bringing us here? Pietro, whose consciousness was recalled by Rosen's words, swallowed hard and forced himself to calm down, then asked, still extremely wary. Oh, a good question, but I must first state a rather cruel fact. I'm actually looking for your sister, and you, or just a useless extra. Rosen answered Pietro's question very impolitely. And it was indeed true. Compared to Quicksilver from the X-Men universe, Pietro in this world truly had no value. Because Pietro's speedster ability in this world was not his own talent, nor was it the Mind Stone. It originated from Wanda. Or rather, chaos magic. Wanda in this world is the fated Scarlet Witch, the controller of chaos magic. And one of the characteristics of chaos magic is that it can alter reality. Wanda's chaos magic was not bestowed by the Mind Stone. As a single universe-level treasure, the Mind Stone didn't have the capability to grant chaos magic, a multi-universe level power. So, Wanda's chaos magic had been with her since birth. She just hadn't realized it all this time. However, clues could be seen from her life experiences. The most representative example was the bomb that landed in front of her years ago. Because it wasn't a dud at all. It's important to know that besides being advanced, the weapons produced by the Stark Group were most praised for their reliability. The probability of a dud appearing couldn't be said to be zero. But it was basically like winning $1 million lottery jackpot all at once. So the real reason was that the young Wanda, inadvertently activating her abilities, rewrote reality. She turned the bomb that landed in front of her into a dud. The process of the two becoming power users later was also similar. During Hydra's human experiments, Wanda hoped that she and her brother would succeed. So Pietro became a speedster. Wanda also officially began to awaken her powers. Chaos magic, a power that goes against all reason, is just that unreasonable. So, compared to Wanda, the fated Scarlet Witch, her brother Pietro was no different from a random person on the street to Rosen. Wanda, what do you want to do to her? Hearing that Rosen was after his sister, Pietro, being a doting brother, immediately exploded. However, Rosen didn't humor him. The water elemental reached out and pressed Pietro firmly to the ground. Pietro. Seeing this, Wanda immediately became anxious and shouted at Rosen, "Let him go." What's the rush? Rosen shook his head, just about to explain, when he suddenly felt that he had lost control of the water elemental. Then Rosen saw the water elemental release Pietro and turn towards him. Chaos magic is really that heaven-defying, huh? It's important to note that there's no such thing as a summoned water elemental, betraying, in Warcraft. Clearly, this was again the chaotic magic energy inadvertently influenced by Wanda at work. This was also the first time Rosen's system skills were directly affected by the powers of this world. The show of force failed. Rosen couldn't help but twitch his mouth when he saw this. Then he cast a banish on the out-of-control water elemental, followed by a death coil, directly sending his own summoned creature back to the embrace of the elemental plane. If this universe even has an elemental plane. Banish, a skill of the Human Alliance hero, Blood Mage. The general effect is consistent with the game. The banished unit's movement speed will decrease by 50%, physical attacks are ineffective against the banished unit, and magic attacks against the banished unit will deal an additional 66% damage. However, compared to the game, the banish skill in the real world has additional bonus effects for elemental creatures and demon creatures. For general targets, it only reduces movement speed. For elementals and demons, they are completely immobile for the duration of the skill, and the additional magic damage reaches a 100% bonus. Death Coil fires a bolt of death energy that can be used to attack enemy living units or heal damaged friendly undead units. After dealing with the out-of-control water elemental, Rosen cast 2 more banishes, one on each of the brother and sister pair who were trying to escape. This time, there was no spell failure. The brother and sister pair were directly turned into gaseous forms with difficult movement. Clearly, although chaos magic is heaven-defying, the current Wanda has not yet awakened this power, she can only occasionally activate it when emotionally agitated. And perhaps also because of her youth, after using it once, it's generally difficult to use it a second time in a short period. Such a temper. I haven't even finished speaking, what's your rush? Rosen sighed as he walked over to Wanda, then looked at her and said, I'm looking for you not to do anything to you, but because you possess unparalleled magic talent, and I also want to take on an apprentice. What do you think? Me. A magic apprentice. Wanda, who had been terrified by her banished state, looked incredulous after hearing Rosen's words. That's right, it's you. Are you willing? Rosen nodded, speaking with a gentle expression. His attitude was completely different from when he faced Pietro. The decision to take Wanda as his apprentice wasn't a whim for Rosen. It was a well-thought-out decision. After all, unlike Black Widow and other subordinates Rosen had taken, who were just useful tools to him and posed little threat even if they betrayed him, Wanda, who wielded chaos magic, truly had the potential to threaten him in the future. However, Wanda's immense potential, if guided and utilized properly, could also be a huge asset to Rosen. For such a person, a mere subordinate relationship was far from enough in Rosen's eyes. Moreover, constantly bestowing favors could easily be perceived as having ulterior motives. As for a romantic relationship, putting aside its stability, the premise was that Wanda had to be willing, right? He certainly wouldn't resort to force, that would only create an enemy, and Rosen disdained doing such a thing. So, after some consideration, Rosen felt that becoming master and apprentice might be the quickest way to gain Wanda's trust and draw closer to her. The close, most important non-blood ethical relationship of master and apprentice is not unique to the East. Ancient Europe also highly valued this relationship. The most famous example, of course, is Jesus and his 12 disciples, among whom Judas, as the betrayer, was reviled for 2 millennia because of his actions. Even in modern times, many European countries still attach great importance to the relationship between master and apprentice in folk traditions, excluding countries without history like the United States, of course. Furthermore, in the original plot, Wanda herself is a very emotional person. Therefore, Rosen believed that once a stable master-apprentice relationship was established with Wanda, as long as Rosen didn't do anything bad to Wanda herself, or try to destroy the world, the possibility of her standing against Rosen would be virtually zero. As for Rosen being merely a fake magician, who relied entirely on system skills and couldn't teach Wanda anything after taking her as an apprentice, Rosen wasn't worried at all. If it were someone else as Rosen's apprentice, this would indeed be a problem. But who is Wanda? The host of chaos magic. And chaos magic is a power that can alter reality. So, as long as Wanda firmly believed that she possessed magic talent, and that Rosen was a true magician and what he taught her was real, there was a 90% chance she would learn it. Of course, in this situation, the magic she learned and used would essentially still be chaos magic, merely manifesting in the form of the magic Rosen taught. Can I really do it? Due to her living environment throughout her life, Wanda felt incredibly unreal facing Rosen's sudden invitation. There's no one more capable than you. People with magic talent are 1 in 10,000, and those as outstanding as you are truly rare in the world. Rosen affirmed, and there was no falsehood in his words. After all, there are many people who can use magic in the Marvel universe, but those who can master chaos magic are few, not to mention on Earth, but even in the entire multiverse. Moreover, you've already experienced the power of magic. After becoming my disciple, you and your brother will not only no longer have to live a life of constant wandering, but you'll also be able to master this miraculous power and become among the most powerful people in this world. Rosen said, tempting Wanda, while also casually undoing the banish on the 2 of them. I agree. Feeling her body recover, Wanda didn't hesitate further and decisively accepted Rosen's invitation. After all, everything that had just happened, she had witnessed with her own eyes. Magic, this power, truly exists. Given that, what was there to hesitate about? Of course, there was an even more important point, what Rosen said about them no longer having to live a life of wandering and uncertainty. This was incredibly important to Wanda, who had lived this way for over a decade. Very good, come with me. Since you're becoming an apprentice, there must be a welcome gift. Rosen was very satisfied to see Wanda being so sensible. Wanda. Compared to Wanda's firm attitude, Pietro still harbored distrust towards Rosen at this moment. Of course, there was also, to some extent, a feeling of indignation from Rosen's previous words that had looked down on him. Pietro, this is our only chance to change our fate. I won't give up, Wanda said to Pietro very seriously. All right, if that's your decision. Faced with Wanda's resolute attitude, Pietro could only compromise, glaring at Rosen angrily and saying nothing more. Even though he was the older brother, it was always Wanda, the younger sister, who made the decisions for the brother and sister pair. This was also very evident in the two siblings' debut in Avengers: Age of Ultron. At Strucker's base, letting Tony take the scepter. Later joining Ultron, then defecting. Collaborating with the Avengers. All final decisions were led by Wanda. And now, it was the same. Believe me, this will be the most correct choice you've ever made in your life. Rosen said with a smile. I think so too, Master. Wanda nodded and said. Hearing Wanda's address, Rosen was a little surprised. He hadn't expected the young girl to get into character faster than him. The term she used to address him was not the conventional, sir, but, master. Yes, it was that, you are my master. From the Fate series. However, in Fate, master often means a sovereign. But for Wanda, it meant teacher, or master. This was also a more serious title than sir. Rosen was quite surprised by this. After all, Sokovia is a multilingual country, not a traditional English-speaking country. And based on Wanda's experience, she had barely received any education apart from a few years of elementary school in her early years. This could also be sensed from their previous interactions. Although they both spoke English, the brother and sister pair's Eastern European accent was still very noticeable. Is there something wrong with my address? Seemingly sensing Rosen's surprise, Wanda tilted her head and asked. No, it's very good. I just think our future interactions will be very pleasant. Rosen said with a smile. Although his initial purpose for taking an apprentice was not entirely pure, it felt quite good now. When Wanda reappeared under Rosen's guidance, she was completely transformed, as if she had become a different person. Oh God, are you really my sister? You're so beautiful. Pietro's eyes widened in disbelief. At this moment, Wanda was wearing a vibrant and luxurious red robe. It was the mage robe, a system-produced item that Rosen occasionally used to replenish his mana. On her head, she wore a noble circlet, which was different from the king's crown given to Jessica. After all, Jessica was Rosen's undercover agent placed within S.H.I.E.L.D. and the future Avengers. Wanda, on the other hand, would be by Rosen's side as an openly acknowledged disciple. Therefore, it was better to differentiate them in some details. Moreover, the attributes of the noble circlet were not bad. Actually, the nimble hat would also be very suitable, but that thing was too ugly. Besides the mage robe, Wanda also wore a red cloak called the Cloak of Fire. In the game, its effect was to deal continuous damage to enemies around the wearer. In the game, this equipment would take effect as soon as it was worn. However, in reality, this was clearly inappropriate, as magic equipment should not be inconvenient. Thus, the system-produced Cloak of Fire was also adjusted, becoming an item whose activation could be freely controlled by the wearer's will, allowing them to choose the target to burn, with a radius of a full 16 meters. The effect of this equipment was similar to the Demon Hunter's immolation skill. The two conflicted, and it was also far less powerful than immolation. So, for Rosen, this equipment was purely a chicken rib, something of little value but not worth discarding. If it were him, he would never buy it. Even though its price was only 500,000. But for Wanda, who still lacked the ability to protect herself, such a piece of equipment, combining both offense and defense, was clearly very practical. Then there were the boots of speed, which, although the same model as Jessica's, were not as easily noticeable as a crown worn on the head. Shoes were not as easy to draw attention to. Furthermore, the length of the mage robe was almost floor length, completely capable of covering the shoes. All the pieces of equipment were a vibrant fiery red, and after Wanda put them on, Rosen seemed to see the graceful Scarlet Witch of the future. And compared to the Scarlet Witch's attire in the original plot, the equipment Rosen gave her was much more beautiful in appearance. Aside from lacking floating orbs, her attire was very similar to that of the Blood Elf Prince Kael'thas. Of course, this was just the basic appearance. In addition, Rosen also gave Wanda a magic shield amulet, a girdle of might, and 2 rings of protection. However, compared to these pieces of equipment, Rosen also gave Wanda a very special item. That was Kellen's Dagger of Escape, an item whose effect was the same as the Watcher's Blink skill, making it an excellent piece of equipment for making a quick getaway. And besides the equipment, Wanda's complexion was also much better than before. Although still a bit thin, it was much rosier than when she first arrived. Because Rosen had given her a life potion. Although this item was mainly used to treat injuries, it also had a nourishing effect, though doing so was a bit wasteful. It was only because Wanda was his disciple that Rosen generously gave her a bottle. As for Pietro, he could recover slowly on his own. It's all right, it's all bestowed by teacher. Hearing her brother's praise, Wanda couldn't help but feel a little shy. But in her heart, she was delighted. After all, girls love beauty. Didn't Barakova, standing nearby, already have red eyes from envy? A wandering orphan girl, suddenly becoming her boss's disciple, how could Barakova's heart be so easily balanced? However, unbalanced as she might be inwardly, at least on the surface, Barakova still maintained a very proper attitude. She knew that this person's position in Rosen's heart was certainly far higher than her own. I just feel like something is still missing, right, it's a weapon. Rosen exclaimed, clapping his hands after observing Wanda. Although Kellen's Dagger of Escape could theoretically be used as a weapon, and while it had no other attribute bonuses, as equipment, its sharpness and toughness were far beyond what an ordinary dagger could compare to. But reality wasn't a game, a mage holding a dagger just didn't look right. As for a staff, the staff of Antonidas was not suitable to be given to Wanda for now, it was too valuable and unnecessary. Other items like the staff of teleportation or staff of preservation were also unsuitable. So, after a brief consideration, Rosen took out one of the first pieces of equipment he ever bought, a red crystal ball, the Orb of Fire. Now it's perfect. Looking at Wanda, dressed in red and holding a red crystal ball, Rosen was finally satisfied. No wonder so many people enjoyed playing dress-up games with beautiful women, it was indeed quite interesting. Thank you for your bestowal, teacher, Wanda will certainly make good use of these treasures. Wanda said very earnestly. Rosen had given her a very detailed introduction and instructions for use with each piece of equipment. Wanda, who had always lived at the bottom, also clearly understood what these powerful effects meant for ordinary people. So, for Rosen, all of this might just be a beauty dress-up game. But for Wanda, it represented a complete change of destiny. Therefore, at this moment, she was immensely grateful to Rosen from the bottom of her heart. No need for extra words. As my disciple, these things are necessary, and don't think that becoming my disciple means you can rest easy. If you don't study hard, I won't be lenient with you. I am very strict, Rosen said with a serious expression. Yes, teacher, I will study hard. Wanda nodded, promising. It's getting late today, Barakova, arrange for them to rest. Tomorrow morning, both of you will start your lessons. Rosen nodded, then instructed Barakova. Wait, I have to learn too. Pietro was stunned upon hearing Rosen's words. That's natural, but what you'll learn isn't magic, but other things. Or are you, as the elder brother, planning to hide behind your sister forever? Rosen said, not without a hint of sarcasm. Although Pietro was just an ordinary person, he was Wanda's brother after all. So, he still needed some training, more or less. If he couldn't learn other things, couldn't he learn combat and firearms? He couldn't really be a burden to Wanda. Of course not, I will always protect Wanda by her side. Facing Rosen's sarcasm, Pietro's face flushed red as he declared loudly. You better be. Rosen raised an eyebrow. The next morning, after breakfast, Wanda, led by Barakova, arrived at the villa's backyard. And this was the magic class Rosen had prepared. As for Pietro, he was taken away before he even had breakfast and dropped off at the army camp to meet his teacher. Yes, that's right, Rosen also arranged a special teacher for Pietro, Zemo, who had just been promoted by Barakova and Maria Gomez. Thinking of Zemo's ability in the movie to almost single-handedly dismantle the entire Avengers. I believe Pietro will get very good training under him. Teacher, don't we have any corresponding books for our class? Wanda asked Rosen, sitting on a chair in the courtyard, looking bewildered. Although she hadn't attended much school, she had read some miscellaneous books and seen films. Sokovia was politically chaotic, but not isolated. However, perhaps due to the era in which the works were created in Rosen's world before he transmigrated. So in the Marvel Universe, there were no new generation fantasy works like Harry Potter or A Song of Ice and Fire. But older fantasy works from the 50s and 60s, like The Lord of the Rings and The Chronicles of Narnia, did exist. And in European folklore, there were also various interesting legends. So Wanda was not entirely unfamiliar with the term, magic. It's just that in her conventional impression, shouldn't learning magic involve a magic book? Our sect, known as the Arcanists, has always been a single lineage. All spells are taught one-on-one by master and disciple, so there are no such things as magic books. Rosen confidently bluffed, not batting an eye. Although he wasn't a true magician, it didn't stop him from bluffing. After all, he hadn't read so many novels for nothing before transmigrating, and when it came to understanding magic in the Marvel Universe. Except for Kamar Taj, no, it should be said, except for a few powerhouses like the Ancient One, most ordinary mages might not actually know as much as Rosen. Magic books. Rosen couldn't really say he didn't have them. It's just that unlike what Wanda and most people considered books for teaching magic knowledge. What would appear in Rosen's system store were a type of book made with magic. These were the 5 great books familiar to Warcraft players: Book of Strength, Book of Agility, Book of Intelligence, Manual of Health, and Tome of Knowledge. As for the Book of Experience and Book of Energy, which were most valued by players in the game, they did not exist. After all, Rosen did not improve his strength by raising his level, so they were removed by the system. The purpose of these books was not to be read, but to be consumed to improve attributes. And these books could only be refreshed by the special store, with a not so high probability. Perhaps one would appear every 2 or 3 weeks. Moreover, except for the Tome of Knowledge, the other types of books only added 1 attribute point each. For the earlier Rosen, it was not bad, but for the current Rosen, it was merely better than nothing. Of course, Rosen would not dislike them, he would buy them every time they refreshed. It's true that only one appears every 2 or 3 weeks, but isn't it about accumulating small amounts to make a large sum? Accumulating for hundreds or thousands of years, that would be an incredible number. As for whether Rosen could live that long, there was no need to doubt. Not to mention the Death Mask, an artifact that could absorb others' life force, the Manual of Health among the 5 books itself extended lifespan. Its effect was even not much worse than the Death Mask. Don't be fooled by the Death Mask's ability to absorb 50% of life force. This life force is not calculated based on the lifespan of the person being absorbed. Normally, half the life force of a healthy ordinary person is only enough to increase Rosen's lifespan by about a month. Rosen had killed nearly 10,000 people in Hell's Kitchen in Mexico, only just barely accumulating 1,000 years of lifespan. In contrast, the Manual of Health added a lot of lifespan, with one book adding half a year. So the current Rosen truly had no need to worry about lifespan issues. Arcanist. I understand. Then, teacher, are there other magic factions in this world? Hearing Rosen's explanation, Wanda believed him without hesitation. However, being clever, she immediately grasped another meaning in Rosen's words. Rosen said, our sect, which meant there were other sects, right? That's right, besides our Arcanist sect, there are actually many other factions on Earth. The most famous among them is the Mystic Arts of Kamar Taj, which is also the largest magic faction on Earth. The others are mostly small-scale factions like our Arcanists. Rosen looked at Wanda with approval, then introduced, and beyond Earth, there are even more magic factions. For example, the legendary divine realm of Asgard has its own unique magic heritage. Does Asgard really exist? Wanda's eyes widened upon hearing this. What Rosen said was too explosive for her. Not only magic, but also mythology. But then again, if there's magic, why can't there be mythology? Of course it exists. Not only Asgard, but Olympus and the Egyptian gods also exist. However, due to certain reasons, Earth is nominally under Asgardian rule now, so other pantheons pay very little attention to Earth. There are too many secrets here to explain all at once, so I won't elaborate further. But later, I can take you to meet the legendary thunder god Thor and the god of mischief Loki. Oh, and they are not uncle and nephew as in legends, but brothers. Rosen explained. Although Thor and Loki are brothers in the Marvel Universe, in conventional human legends, they are uncle and nephew, just like in the world Rosen came from before transmigrating. Rosen guessed that Loki was behind this situation. After all, if he couldn't beat Thor, he could only cause trouble in such minor matters to find some psychological balance. If I can't be your older brother in reality, then I'll be your uncle in legends. This actually fit Loki's behavior pattern quite well. Wanda listened with great interest to the mythological secrets Rosen spoke of, but she also knew that the main point of the lesson was not this, so she didn't press Rosen with further questions. However many magic factions there are, broadly speaking, there are actually only two, white magic and black magic. As for the methods of cultivation, there are three. Rosen continued his teaching. The definition of white magic is not the righteous magic, defined in some novels or legends, but rather a general term for all conventional magic other than black magic. Rosen explained, the reason for this classification is that the dark power used by black magic will have a certain impact on the practitioner's psyche, while white magic will not. However, it should be noted that black magic is not absolutely evil. If a practitioner's will is firm enough to resist the erosion of dark power, he can still become a righteous magician. Similarly, if a magician is inherently evil, even if he uses white magic, it cannot change the fact of his evil. This is also where our Arcanist sect differs from other magic factions. We are skilled in using white magic, but we do not reject black magic. This is a very important point in the first lesson I'm going to teach you. In all things, you cannot just look at the surface. Next, I will talk about the essence of magic and the three methods of magic cultivation. The essence of magic is actually very simple. It's about using our mental power to harness certain specific energies and extradimensional energies to simulate other forces, such as ice, fire, and strong winds. Some relatively rudimentary schools of magic use incantations and magic circles to cast talismans, but for us archmages, only a very few powerful spells require that. Most ordinary magic can be easily cast whenever we wish, which is very convenient. As Rosen explained, he demonstrated by condensing a basketball-sized fireball in his hand, then transforming it into ice, and then into a small whirlwind. He switched between them with great fluidity. Wanda watched, mesmerized. Indeed, among the series of skills granted by the system, there were no basic spells common in novels, such as fireball spell or ice arrow. However, this did not prevent Rosen from developing and mastering these spells himself. Because after activating all his skills, especially those of a archmage, he did not completely confine himself to the few in-game skills. After all, besides Warcraft, he also played a lot of World of Warcraft, its expanded work. Naturally, he would also try to imitate the skills of spellcasting professions like archmages and warlocks from the game. For example, basic skills like arcane missiles, ice arrow, fireball spell, and shadow bolt can now all be cast by Rosen. In the game, the Archmage's normal attack is listed as physical attack. But what kind of physical attack is a remote energy projectile? So, in the real world, the Archmage's normal attack is actually a single target magic missile, which can also be called arcane missiles. And isn't Ice Arrow just the single target version of Blizzard? Fireball spell is also very simple. Similarly, the Blood Mage's normal attack, in reality, is Fireball spell. As for Shadow Bolt, just reduce some of the dark energy from the Death Knight's death coil and change its shape, and it's done, isn't it? As for why Rosen rarely uses these skills normally, the reason is even simpler. Being able to use them is one thing, but in terms of power and application scenarios, they are, to say the least, underwhelming. They are far less effective than the mature skills provided by the system, and Rosen has to concentrate to simulate their casting, and the mana consumed is not necessarily less than system skills. So, when Rosen is not lacking in mana, these self-developed spells are no different from a mere trifle. When he's bored, he might continue to research and expand them, but for actual combat, forget it. However, using these spells, which he isn't very proficient with, as teaching demonstrations, is obviously very suitable. They immediately captivated Wanda. There are three main ways to practice magic. The first is self, and this is the most important way to practice magic, because it cultivates our mental power. Mental power is often the foundation for learning more profound magic, especially dark magic. If self-cultivation is insufficient and one rashly comes into contact with dark magic, it's very easy to fall completely into darkness. And some soul spells, hypnosis, mind control, and other magic also require the support of a strong self. This first type of self-cultivation is a mandatory course. The second method of cultivation is the usual mode for most conventional magic, which is to utilize the energy around us. Although we can't see it with our naked eyes, energy still surrounds us in many forms. At any time, a skilled archmage can utilize these powerful surrounding energies and manipulate them to create various effects. You can form and throw energy bolts or erect shields. You can even summon some small props. Although these items are usually quite unstable and may disappear as quickly as they appeared. As Rosen spoke, he formed a spell blade, similar to those commonly used by Kamar Taj archmages, and a spell shield in his hand. The difference was that the spell blade he released carried a distinct fiery heat, while the spell shield emitted a chilling cold. And unlike the spells used by the archmages of Kamar Taj, they were not golden. Evidently, this was also something Rosen had imitated by deconstructing his own spell skills. However, while the spells were imitations, the cultivation methods Rosen described were not entirely misleading. They were indeed the magic cultivation methods of the Marvel Universe, which Rosen had accidentally learned about from Marvel comic data when he was bored before his transmigration. In the world before Rosen's transmigration, many people believed that the magic of the Marvel Universe was all released by contracting with Dimension Lords and using their power. In reality, this was not the case. Many of Kamar Taj's spells primarily borrowed power from Vishanti, and the Ancient One even more outrageously borrowed power from countless dimensional demon gods, including Dormammu. But that doesn't mean they are constantly borrowing power from Dimension Lords. For conventional spell blades, spell shields, and most basic spells, there is no need to borrow power from Dimension Lords at all. The universe's own energy is sufficient to support these basic spells. For example, the magic of Asgard, the magic of the Eternal, and the magic of the Pantheon gods are all simply applications of cosmic energy. And not borrowed power from Dimension Lords. Moreover, if all magic truly were borrowed, what would the archmages of Kamar Taj practice normally? Borrowing power and still having to practice it yourself, that's too much. The third method of cultivation is a rather lazy approach, and to be more severe, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it an evil path, but unfortunately, this method of cultivation is also the mainstream practice for many schools on Earth. This involves establishing contact with some high-dimensional beings, signing contracts, and borrowing their power. The third method of spell cultivation Rosen mentioned is what many consider the orthodox magic of the Marvel Universe, borrowing power from high-dimensional cosmic beings like Dimension Lords. This method is indeed fast, but as Rosen said, it is an evil path. After all, what is borrowed must be returned. And with interest. After all, not every archmage is the Ancient One, who can default on debts whenever she pleases. Being a defaulter also requires strength. If it's some benevolent high-dimensional being, the contractor might have to pay with faith or some other relatively normal things. If it's an evil high-dimensional being, then what needs to be paid is the soul. So, unless absolutely necessary, never casually contact those high-dimensional beings, because these beings are often very good at disguise and deception, such as the legendary demon lords. Rosen warned sternly. Actually, this point was meaningless for Wanda. Because she is, after all, a natural host of chaos magic, and she has an inexhaustible supply of chaos magic, so there's naturally no need to borrow from other Dimension Lords. Even if she did borrow, she would have the confidence to not return it, just like the Ancient One. But one thing is one thing. As a teacher, Rosen still had to teach what needed to be taught clearly. However, there was actually one more method of magic cultivation that Rosen didn't mention. Because this method of magic, in any world, is taboo, it is evil. That is, sacrifice. According to this station's follow-up report, Iron Man has once again appeared in the Afghanistan region, eliminating a terrorist stronghold. It is reported that this is his third operation, but we still do not know the true identity of this Iron Man. The news on TV was broadcasting content about Iron Man wreaking havoc in the Afghanistan region. Rosen, however, fell into deep thought as he watched the news. It seems there will be no battle with Obadiah Stane's Ironmonger. So, Tony Stark has focused more of his energy on the Ten Rings gang in Afghanistan. And his identity as Iron Man has not yet been exposed. This was originally nothing. But Rosen suddenly remembered that Ivan Vanko had also been taken by him to another world. This way, Tony's two main early adversaries are both gone. The only remaining troubles are palladium poisoning, which S.H.I.E.L.D. can resolve at any time, and Killian's Extremis. As for Extremis, Rosen actually quite wanted it too. But wouldn't that just make him the other party's nanny? How could that be? It's still necessary to increase the intensity for him. After all, if he always has it too easy, how can he continuously extort favors? But the problem is, where to find suitable villains. Teacher, I succeeded. Just then, Wanda ran in excitedly, and as she waved her hands, a water elemental was summoned by her. Although this water elemental differed in appearance and color from the water elemental Rosen summoned, it was indeed a real water elemental creature. Seeing this, Rosen's pupils contracted. This is truly defying the heavens. Just as Rosen had anticipated, although he was not a true magician, through his understanding of Marvel Universe magic from his previous life, he had imaginatively compiled his own set of theories. He still successfully guided Wanda into the magic world. So, on the third day of Rosen's magic teaching to Wanda, she successfully entered the realm and cast her first fireball spell. In the time that followed, Wanda learned more and more spells. Even some spells that Rosen himself didn't know, such as illusion magic, which he only taught verbally, Wanda mastered. In just over a month, Rosen felt that his already not so abundant magic foundation was almost drained by Wanda. It was only because the practice time was relatively short that Wanda's spells were still relatively weak in intensity, but the number of spells she learned was quite large. The only remaining shortcoming was summon spells. Rosen didn't have a good solution for this either. After all, unlike ordinary spells, which only require magic energy, summoned spells generally require establishing resonance with the plane where the summoned object resides through a magic circle to be summoned. Of course, Rosen used a system skill, so it wasn't that troublesome, and besides a fleeting summon circle when he summoned, Rosen had no clue about teaching summon spells. Ultimately, he could only draw the fleeting summon circle that appeared when he summoned a water elemental and let Wanda figure it out herself. But how many days has it been? Wanda actually succeeded. Looking at the water elemental she summoned, it was clearly an elemental creature native to the Marvel Universe. Compared to the water elemental Rosen summoned, this water elemental had a nose and eyes, and its appearance was more like a person. However, why did Rosen feel that the appearance of this water elemental looked a bit familiar? Teacher, is there something wrong with the water elemental I summoned? After all, its appearance is quite different from the water elemental you summoned. Wanda also noticed that Rosen's expression wasn't quite right, so she asked somewhat nervously. No, there's nothing wrong. I can only say that, just as I thought, you are a true genius. As for the difference, it's also normal, because there isn't just one elemental realm. It's normal for elements from different elemental realms to have different appearances. Rosen shook his head and said. He remembered, wasn't the appearance of this water elemental the image of the elementals Mysterio fabricated to trick little Spider in Spider-Man, Far From Home? So, the elemental creatures in this universe actually look like this. But thinking about it, it doesn't seem that strange. After all, the elementals Mysterio concocted were themselves inspired by Earth mythology. This point was also confirmed in the movie by Nick Fury and Maria Hill. No, by the Skrulls who had transformed into them. Phew, then I'm relieved. I thought my summoning went wrong. Hearing Rosen's approval, Wanda breathed a sigh of relief and said happily. However, Wanda quickly noticed that Rosen was looking at her with a strange gaze. What's wrong, teacher? Is something wrong with me? Wanda asked. No, I just thought of something. Wanda, what do you think of Iron Man? Rosen asked Wanda. That's right, aren't the brother and sister pair at odds with Tony? Wouldn't it be quite fitting to have them be one of Tony's fated trials? Of course, Rosen definitely wouldn't actually let the brother and sister pair kill Tony. He also didn't believe that it was right for the brother and sister pair to harbor hatred towards Tony. But letting them beat up Tony to vent a bit, doesn't seem impossible, does it? Tony, for the sake of my good disciple, I'll just have to inconvenience you a little. Iron Man. The one in the news recently? Wanda asked. Exactly, him. Rosen nodded. He should be a good person, right? He eliminated the terrorists there, so the lives of the people there should be better. Speaking of Iron Man, Wanda couldn't help but think of Sokovia, her own country. This country, perhaps, also needs a presence like Iron Man. And now she has learned a power like magic, but then she thought of Barakova, this person who seemed to be her teacher's housekeeper type, and she was also one of the people causing chaos in this country. Then do you know Iron Man's true identity? Rosen didn't notice Wanda's thoughts. Even if he knew, he would probably support Wanda. After all, who else would spoil his disciple if not him? But support isn't for now. At least, the superficial entanglement between S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra must be resolved first. His true identity? I don't know, but I'm quite curious. From your tone, teacher, it seems you know who he is. Wanda asked curiously. That's right, I do know, and you should be very familiar with this person. Rosen nodded. Ah, I'm very familiar. Is he a Sokovian? No way. Wanda looked bewildered, completely unable to connect anyone in her memory with the other party. His name is Tony Stark. Rosen said. With a bang. The water elemental Wanda summoned exploded. Sorry, teacher, I lost my composure. The water elemental exploded, and the splashing water landed on Wanda's face, calming her mind which had been clouded by anger. She then quickly apologized to Rosen with an apologetic look. No need to apologize, there are no outsiders here, so there's no need to hide anything. Rosen shook his head and said, the most taboo thing about emotions is suppression, it's a good thing to vent them. Teacher, do you know Tony Stark? Wanda nodded, then asked. Yes, and we have a pretty good relationship. Rosen did not deny it, nodding as he spoke. I understand. Wanda was silent for a few seconds before speaking in a somewhat hoarse voice. Although she didn't know why, Rosen obviously knew about the animosity between her and Tony Stark. Otherwise, he wouldn't have suddenly brought him up and asked for her opinion of him. If that were the case, it seemed her revenge couldn't be carried out. Although the time they had spent together wasn't long, Rosen's kindness to her was immense. It could be said that he had completely changed her destiny. Being grateful, she naturally wouldn't go against Rosen. What's more, without Rosen's guidance and the power of magic, she, living at the bottom of Sokovia, wouldn't have had the qualifications to seek revenge against Tony Stark, that high and mighty fellow, in the first place. Given this, then so be it. No, you don't understand. Rosen, however, shook his head. Wanda looked at him in confusion. She didn't even want revenge anymore, was that not allowed? Could it be? She couldn't help but think of Tony Stark's playboy nature and matters like arranged marriages. Her face turned pale. What are you thinking? You wouldn't think I'm trying to persuade you not to seek revenge, would you? You still have to get this revenge. Rosen looked at Wanda's slightly pale face. Although he didn't know what she was thinking, it was definitely a misunderstanding, so he immediately explained. This disciple's talent was undeniable, but she just thought too much and easily got caught up in trivialities. If he didn't make things clear, Rosen was really afraid she would go down the same path as in the original plot. Hearing Rosen's words, Wanda couldn't help but look bewildered. Did her teacher mean he agreed to her revenge? But her teacher had said before that he had a good relationship with Tony Stark, right? For a moment, Wanda's little head couldn't wrap around it. Tony and I have a good relationship, but no matter how good it is, it's not as close as you being my only disciple. How could I let you suffer for that guy? Rosen walked over to Wanda, rubbing his obedient disciple's head as he spoke. Teacher, you are so good to me. Don't worry, I won't make things difficult for you. I won't seek revenge, and I know it wasn't Stark's fault to begin with. He's just an arms dealer. My real enemies should be those warlords. Rosen's doting words made Wanda, who was not as strong as she appeared, burst into tears. The culprits of killing were never the weapons themselves or the people who manufactured and sold them, but the people who used the weapons. How could Wanda not understand such a simple truth? It was just as Rosen thought. To survive in this terrible country, the brother and sister pair, Wanda and Pietro, needed a belief and a purpose to keep them going. Otherwise, the brother and sister pair in the original plot wouldn't have so easily let go of their hatred for Tony. And now, Wanda already had a new psychological anchor. In this situation, whether or not to seek revenge on Tony was actually irrelevant. I'm glad you understand this. People cannot live in hatred, it will only make themselves more painful. However, this doesn't mean you can't get revenge, Rosen comforted Wanda. No, I won't seek revenge, really, teacher, believe me. Wanda still thought Rosen was trying to comfort her. No, this revenge must be taken. Rosen said very seriously. But why? Isn't Tony Stark your friend? Looking at Rosen's serious expression, Wanda finally understood that Rosen was not comforting her, but genuinely wanted her to seek revenge, which only made her more confused. He's a friend, and that doesn't conflict with you seeking revenge. And revenge doesn't necessarily mean killing the other person, it can also mean beating them up, right? Rosen said with a smile. Moreover, this can also be considered a practical combat assessment for you. Wanda now understood a little. Her teacher might indeed be Tony Stark's friend, but it was more likely that he was a legendary, bad friend. Okay, then I'll listen to teacher. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. Wanda thought for a moment and then agreed. With a new psychological anchor, she indeed didn't hate Tony Stark as much as she used to. But that didn't mean she found Tony pleasant. With her teacher Rosen not minding, she was even less bothered about teaching him a lesson. What about Iron Man? I also have magic. And she also wanted to see how far her current strength had reached. Good girl, but there's no rush for this. You still need to talk to your brother about this, after all, it's not just your hatred. Don't really kill Tony when the time comes, that would cause a lot of trouble. Rosen admonished. He was extremely satisfied with his disciple's obedience. You mean, let Pietro and I go against Stark together? Isn't that not good? After all, Pietro is just an ordinary person, and Stark's Iron Man suit still has some substance. Hearing Rosen's words, Wanda couldn't help but frown. Don't worry about that. In the coming period, I will also prepare an Iron Man suit similar to Tony's for your brother. Believe me, Tony will definitely not have an easy time facing you, the brother and sister pair. Rosen reassured her. That's right, one Wanda wasn't enough. Rosen planned to have Pietro also wear the battle suit he made, and the two of them would go together to apply some pressure to Tony. After all, what if Tony stopped updating and iterating his Iron Man suit without external pressure? He was doing this for Tony's own good. Thinking of the scene where Tony was brutally beaten by Pietro and Wanda, wearing the Iron Man suits he had built, Rosen's lips couldn't help but curl up. Meanwhile, on the other side of Earth, Tony Stark had no idea that he was about to suffer a great calamity. At this moment, he was worried about his own body. Tony, the palladium poisoning is progressing too quickly. You can't continue to pilot the Iron Man suit. How about I do it instead? Ethan, who had become Tony's assistant, looked at the latest test results and spoke with an extremely serious expression. Ethan was very happy about Tony's changes and his help to his hometown. But this didn't mean he wanted to see Tony pay with his life for it. Don't worry, Ethan, remember what Mr. Prophet said. I will be the savior of this world, there must be another way. Although he was also very anxious internally, Tony still stubbornly refused Ethan's good intentions. He had no idea that the prophet, Mr. he had been thinking about was currently plotting against him. What? You're reopening the Stark Expo? Pepper looked at Tony with a surprised expression. That's right, is there a problem? Tony retorted, wait, are you catching a cold? Of course there's a problem. Don't you know what the situation is right now? Because you closed the weapons department, the company's stock hasn't recovered, and you want to waste time and a lot of money to hold an expo. Pepper questioned Tony with great dissatisfaction, her voice carrying a significant nasal tone, as if she really had a cold. Although Rosen had intervened in this world, and Ethan hadn't died, Tony still chose to close Stark Industries' weapons department. And after closing the weapons department, Tony wasn't as concerned about company matters. He was either in the laboratory with Ethan or flying around the world as Iron Man. Stark Industries' affairs were basically all handled by Pepper. But this also made Pepper very unhappy, as it increased her workload by an unknown number of times. And now Tony, this guy, suddenly said he wanted to hold the Stark Expo, and again, he was dumping everything on her. Oh, my dear Pepper, you must know this is very important to me, and it's what I care about most for a while. You should support me. Tony said. Also, I think you'd better wear a mask until your cold is gone. In fact, he was preparing to officially appear in his Iron Man suit at this Stark Expo, announcing to the world that he was Iron Man. How do I feel like you're reopening the expo is some kind of vanity at play? Pepper looked at the Iron Man suit behind Tony, not without sarcasm. Perhaps so. Go do it, everything is up to you. Tony said noncommittally. Ha, I've been doing it, I haven't stopped. Pepper said with a helpless and complaining expression. This time it's still quite different. Tony smiled and waved his hand, then pushed a document in front of Pepper. What could be different? You dump everything on me, and you don't even give me a raise. Pepper grumbled like a weary worker as she opened the document. But the next second, she let out a sharp shriek. A few minutes later, Pepper, walking out of the villa, was still a bit dazed. In her hand, she still held the appointment letter for Stark Industries CEO that Tony had just given her. Yes, she had just been officially named CEO by Tony. This was clearly a very unexpected, but also joyful, event for her. Madam, where are we going? The driver asked after Pepper got in the car. To the airport. I need to return to Stark Industries headquarters immediately, there are important matters to announce. Pepper's expression straightened, and she spoke with the air of a strong businesswoman. She then lowered her head and began to review various documents. Yes, madam. The driver didn't look back and started the car directly. Wait, this doesn't seem to be the way to the airport. After a long time, Pepper, who had been engrossed in company documents, finally looked up and out the car window, only then realizing that the scenery outside was wrong. She then looked at the driver in the driver's seat, while her hand quietly reached for the GPS alarm button next to the seat. At this moment, Pepper also noticed the driver's abnormality. It was indeed her original driver, but his expression at this time was numb, completely different from usual. Baker, has something happened? Pepper asked cautiously. Her driver was not happy. Happy was Tony's driver and bodyguard, and only when ordered by Tony or when traveling with Tony would Happy be the driver. However, the driver named Baker ignored Pepper's inquiry, just driving in silence. This made Pepper's heart sink to the bottom. What reassured her was that after she pressed the alarm button in the car, a successful red warning light had already lit up. She hoped the police and Tony would discover her situation as soon as possible. As for rashly resisting, a highly risky action, Pepper would not do it. Without a weapon, such an action would only invite trouble, and Pepper was very clear about this. Soon, the car drove into an abandoned factory building. And in the empty, abandoned factory, a delicate dining table was set, and a young girl in a fire-red robe sat at the table, leisurely enjoying dessert, served by a waiter. This scene was completely out of place with the dilapidated environment of the abandoned factory. As the car stopped, the driver also got out numbly, walked to the back seat, opened the car door, and motioned for Pepper to get out. Pepper took a deep breath, got out of the car, and walked towards the girl. Who are you, and why have you brought me to this place? Pepper walked to the table, secretly steeling herself, and bravely asked the girl in red. Please sit, Ms. Pepper, try this plum brandy and black forest cake. They were just flown in from Sokovia, and they taste very good. The girl did not answer Pepper's question, but smiled and invited Pepper to sit, pointing to the wine and pastries on the table. At the same time, she gestured to the waiter beside her to pour wine and serve dessert to Pepper. Sorry, I don't think I'm in the mood. Pepper forced a smile and replied, just tell me your purpose. All right, I'm very sorry, Ms. Pepper, for inviting you in this manner. But please rest assured, I won't do anything to harm you, it's just, you know, ever since Mr. Stark was kidnapped half a year ago, it hasn't been easy to get close to him. The girl put down her knife and fork and said to Pepper with an apologetic expression. As expected, she came for Tony. Pepper sighed inwardly upon hearing this. Child, I don't know what you want with Tony, but what I do know is that doing this will only make things worse. The FBI, CIA, and whatever Homeland Defense Agency won't let you off. Pepper said. Because the girl looked very young, full of collagen, Pepper even doubted if she was an adult. So, for a woman in her 30s, calling her a child was not presumptuous. Of course I understand Mr. Stark's position in the US, and I understand what I will face after today, but I don't care. The girl's face instantly darkened. The Stark family must pay for their actions. Hearing the girl's words, Pepper's heart grew colder. Good heavens, from the sound of her words, she not only had a grudge against Tony but against the entire Stark family. But fortunately, the other party really didn't seem to have any intention of harming her. However, just thinking of Tony, her heart tensed up again. Since the other party dared to do such a thing, they would definitely have made arrangements for Tony, and she wondered if his metal shell could handle the current situation. Ms. Pepper, are you interested in hearing my story? Just then, the girl spoke again. If you don't mind, Tilda, Pepper nodded. The situation was unclear, so understanding the other party's situation seemed like a good idea. My name is Wanda Maximoff. Don't doubt it, this is my real name. The girl slowly said. That's right, the red-clad girl who kidnapped Pepper here was Wanda, who had already been taken as a disciple by Rosen. And everything happening now was planned by Rosen. I am a Sokovian. I once had a complete and beautiful family, but on that day in 99, everything changed. A missile crashed through the roof of my house, taking my parents with it to the floor below. That was the last time I saw my parents, Wanda continued. Hearing this, Pepper started to break out in a cold sweat. Good heavens, she knew immediately that this was another victim of Stark Industries' weapons. It seemed Tony's decision to close the weapons division might have been the right one. Otherwise, if it continued, who knew how many more people would seek revenge on him. At the same time, Pepper's heart filled with sympathy for Wanda. 1998. 10 years ago. How old was the girl in front of her? How had she managed to get by all these years? But that was just the beginning. Not long after, another missile landed in my home. That missile was less than a meter away from me and my brother. Fortunately, that missile ultimately did not explode, and my brother and I were rescued 2 days later. But over the years, the scene of that day has constantly replayed in my mind, especially the word, Stark, on that missile, which is a nightmare I can't shake off. Ms. Pepper, what do you think I should do to get rid of this nightmare? After Wanda finished speaking, she stared intently at Pepper and asked. Pepper opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but in the end, she couldn't say anything. To say it wasn't Stark Industries' fault, but the fault of those arms dealers who smuggled weapons. That simply wouldn't hold up. Indeed, in the past, under the leadership of the missing former CEO, Obadiah Stane, Stark Industries had smuggled and leaked a large number of military weapons. But that actually only accounted for a small portion of the weapons produced by Stark Industries. More of them were actually for the US military. And although the war in Sokovia back then was not directly triggered by the US military, the US military also promoted it and directly participated. To say that Stark Industries was just a manufacturer and seller, not a user. Theoretically correct, but for many Avengers, they wouldn't care about that. To say that Stark Industries would provide economic compensation. Judging by the actions of this girl named Wanda, she probably wasn't short on money. So, for a moment, Pepper couldn't find any reason to persuade Wanda to give up her revenge. Ultimately, she could only fall silent. But in her heart, she had already begun to regret pressing the location alarm button. Now, she somewhat wished Tony wouldn't come to rescue her. Because the final outcome, whether Tony was harmed or the girl in front of her was harmed, was not what she wanted to see. But she had no power to stop it. However, by now, Pepper had also noticed something very strange. That was, neither the girl in front of her, nor her attendant, nor the driver who was turned, for some unknown reason, seemed to have any weapons. She hadn't seen a single gun. This made her feel very strange. As expected, Ms. Pepper, your position in Mr. Stark's heart is extraordinary. Only 5 minutes have passed since you pressed the alarm button, and he's already on his way. In that case, let's go out and greet the famous Iron Man. Just as Pepper was agonizing, Wanda spoke again. Although the Iron Man suit was very fast, with a speed exceeding Mach 2. But the Iron Man suit at this time was also more troublesome to put on. Even with robotic arm assistance, it still took a considerable amount of time. So 5 minutes was already very fast. And her words also greatly surprised Pepper. It turned out that everything she did was within the other party's grasp. And how did this girl know that Tony was Iron Man? She even knew before Tony arrived. But at this moment, she didn't have time to think too much and could only follow Wanda outside. And as soon as they walked out of the factory, a whistling sound came from the sky. Iron Man, Tony Stark, had arrived. Pepper, what happened? And who is this girl? Tony was very anxious when he received Pepper's distress signal. But upon arrival, he found that Pepper seemed perfectly fine. Wanda and the others beside her also had no weapons. This made him feel a bit strange. But the next second, before Pepper could even answer, he was stunned. He saw the girl in the red robe first raise her hand, then wave it downwards. He felt himself being pulled down from the sky by an invisible force. He crashed directly to the ground in a face plant, even creating a large crater in the ground. Seeing this scene, Pepper also covered her mouth, her face full of disbelief. Now, she seemed to understand why Wanda and the others had no weapons. What's going on, Jarvis? What happened? Tony, still stunned after landing, asked his artificial intelligence. I apologize, sir, I cannot analyze the opponent's attack method. Jarvis also seemed to have crashed for a moment before replying, it appears to be some kind of superpower. The artificial intelligence Jarvis at this time was far from as intelligent as it would later become, and its computational ability was limited. And Wanda's ability was clearly beyond its understanding. Superpower. I feel like I don't recognize this world anymore. Tony mumbled, then struggled to his feet. But the next second, a huge fireball slammed into his suit, blasting him back more than 10 meters. Before he could react, two massive water elementals had appeared beside him, holding him firmly. Uh-oh, I suddenly find this scene a bit familiar. Looking at the two water elementals holding him, Tony suddenly understood that this might not be some superpower, but the power of magic. Like Rosen, who called himself a prophet, this girl in front of him was a mage. This magic girl, I think there might be some misunderstanding between us. Actually, I also know a mage, his name is Rosen. Tony said to Wanda. Misunderstanding. No such thing. Tony Stark, your family has been making weapons for more than a decade, causing immense harm to this world. Today, you will pay the price for it. Wanda snorted coldly and said. Uh-oh, it seems negotiations have failed. I'm sorry for what happened in the past, but you shouldn't have kidnapped Pepper. Hearing Wanda's words, Tony immediately understood that things couldn't be resolved peacefully. If it were any other situation, Tony would have tried to continue talking with the other party. But the fact that she kidnapped Pepper was something he couldn't accept. So, the next second, Tony retaliated. The suit's shoulder launchers extended, and several missiles fired, hitting the water elementals. The huge explosions caused a part of the water elementals' forms to dissipate, though they quickly recovered. But Tony also used this opportunity to break free from control, then quickly flew towards Pepper. For him, rescuing her was the most important thing. Bang! Tony, who was rushing towards Pepper, was blocked by an invisible wall. Without hesitation, he charged and fired his repulsor rays from both palms. The invisible wall was blasted open. But the next second, Wanda smirked, and a magic wall rose again. I hate magic. Seeing this, Tony couldn't help but curse under his breath. Knowing he couldn't take Pepper away, he looked at Wanda again. Alright, Ms. Magic, no matter what grievances we have between us, Pepper is innocent. Let her go, and I'll stay. No, Tony. Pepper wanted to stop him, but she had only opened her mouth when she found she couldn't speak. Although the current Wanda wasn't yet powerful enough to make Black Bolt's mouth disappear with a single thought, as seen in Doctor Strange 2, she could still make Pepper speechless. Of course, don't worry, our grievances won't affect innocent people. I'm only keeping her to prevent you from escaping. Wanda said with a slight smile. Alright, then, Ms. Magic, what exactly do you want to do? Tony sighed inwardly at her words, then asked. What do I want? Your life, of course. I also know that if I defeat you with magic, you definitely won't be convinced, so I will utterly defeat you in the thing you are most proud of. Pietro. Come, let Mr. Stark see how vulnerable his tin can is. Wanda chuckled, then shouted towards the factory building. As her words fell, a mechanical roar immediately sounded from the factory building, followed by heavy footsteps. Tony only had to listen to know it was definitely a big guy. Just as he was filled with doubt and surprise, a huge mechanical arm blasted through the thick wall of the factory building. With another punch, the wall completely shattered. As the smoke and dust dissipated, a giant mech, over 3 meters tall, appeared in Tony's line of sight. Iron Man, Mr. Tony Stark, this is your opponent. I hope you enjoy yourself. Wanda smiled slightly and began to pull Pepper away. Although Wanda's stature was considerably smaller than Pepper's, several pieces of equipment she wore were enchanted with strength, making her physical power far exceed that of an average adult male. Pepper had no ability to resist in her hands and could only be dragged away by Wanda. Tony, seeing this, was anxious and angry, wanting to chase after them, but at this moment, the giant mech had already jetted its tail flames and rushed towards him. Tony, unable to dodge, was directly carried by the giant mech, flying over 100 meters, straight through the abandoned factory area, and onto the road outside. Although this was the suburbs, it was still Los Angeles, and vehicles occasionally drove by on the road. The appearance of two battling robots immediately caused the vehicles on the road to brake or accelerate in alarm. One SUV, in particular, couldn't brake in time and directly crashed into the giant mech that had been pinning Tony, forcing it to temporarily release Tony and move the car, whose front was almost embedded in its body, to the side. After all, it was Pietro driving this mech now, not Obadiah. Naturally, he wouldn't do something like throwing a car with people inside at someone. Jarvis, analyze the opponent's Iron Man suit. Tony, who had just been disoriented by the mech's impact, took this opportunity to get back on his feet, ignoring the suit's damage warnings, and asked while examining the mech. He initially suspected that this mech was a replica of his technology. But that thought only lasted for a moment. Because he discovered that the opponent's mech's energy system was completely different from his own. Analysis complete. The opponent's energy core cannot be parsed. As Jarvis's voice sounded, some basic analysis data of the giant mech appeared before Tony, but Jarvis was completely unable to analyze the opponent's energy system. It was normal. Vibranium energy relied entirely on the unique properties of the metal itself and was not at all on the same path as modern science's conventional energy systems. At this time, Tony's understanding of vibranium was still limited to it being the most durable metal. An unknown energy system. How interesting. Tony couldn't help but become interested in the opponent's Iron Man suit. However, he also knew that this was not the time to consider that. Defeating the opponent and rescuing Pepper was the most important thing. But since the large mech had just saved someone, he didn't take the opportunity to counterattack. Instead, after the mech refocused its target on him, Tony commanded Jarvis to gather energy, and simultaneously fired huge energy beams from his chest and palms, blasting towards the opponent. However, in the face of such a powerful attack, the opponent's mech performed a surprisingly agile movement, directly shifting several meters sideways, avoiding Tony's attack, then rushed back in front of Tony and punched him dozens of meters away. Immediately, before Tony could land, Pietro had already driven the mech to catch up again and delivered another punch. He directly used Tony as a baseball. It was fortunate that the Iron Man suit's shock absorption system was strong enough. Otherwise, after just a few hits, Tony would have truly become canned meat. Well, the minced meat kind. How can this big guy be so agile? Tony, who was knocked back again, finally understood the gap between them this time, directly activated his flight system in midair, and finally, before being attacked again, escaped the opponent's attack range. Tony had originally thought this big guy would be clumsy, but its agility exceeded his imagination. Jarvis, fly to maximum altitude. Seeing the opponent continue to fly towards him, Tony's expression changed, and he immediately had Jarvis activate full-speed flight, soaring towards the sky. Tony Stark, you coward, running away. Don't you want your woman anymore? Seeing Tony fly away, Pietro chased hard, shouting through the mech's communication system. If there was any weakness in the vibranium energy core Iron Man suit made by Rosen compared to the Iron Man suit, it would probably be its flight speed. I'm not running away. It's just that fighting on this street can easily injure innocent people. It's better if we find another place. Tony argued, still flying upwards without looking back. However, he lowered his flight speed, maintaining a pace where the mech couldn't catch him, but also wouldn't lose track of him. Ha! You, flying so high, are you trying to use low temperatures against me? Then you're overthinking it. As both sides flew higher and higher, Pietro, driving the large mech, couldn't help but recall something Rosen had told him before they came, and then mocked Tony. Sir, it seems the opponent's suit has also solved the freezing problem. Jarvis's voice rang out inside Tony's armor after Pietro's shout. Of course I know that. Change course, to the factory. Tony cursed again, then changed direction, flying towards the location of the Stark Industries factory. Also, call Happy for me. Since Plan A failed, it was time for Plan B. Yes, sir. Jarvis quickly called Happy. Boss, where are you? Happy soon answered the phone. Happy, are you at the company? Tony asked. Yes, boss, and Agent Coulson from that agency you asked me to notify. They're here too, and they've already sent more people to help us find Pepper, Happy said quickly. Okay, never mind that for now. I need you to go to the central control room immediately, turn on all circuits, and then wait for my signal. Tony shouted. Okay, I'm on my way. Happy didn't ask any questions and rushed towards the factory's central control room. I hope this works. The opponent's suit is more powerful than expected. This is the last method I can think of, Tony mused, then piloted his Iron Man suit to hover for a moment, firing his last few missiles at Pietro. But these missiles, aside from delaying Pietro for a moment, couldn't cause him any harm. There was nothing Tony could do. The Mark IV suit he was wearing didn't carry many weapons, and what he had was almost used up in that short time. The only remaining weapons were the energy cannons. However, the palm cannons had low energy and insufficient damage, and the charging action was too obvious, allowing the opponent to easily dodge, and it consumed a lot of energy. While the arc reactor was powerful, the energy sustainability of the first-generation palladium reactor wasn't as high as imagined. It wasn't enough to support the Iron Man suit in a prolonged battle. In Iron Man 2, Tony's frequent replacement of palladium cores and the rapidly spreading palladium poisoning symptoms already proved this point. This also filled Tony with a sense of powerlessness. However, what Tony didn't know was that Pietro was also cursing at this moment. Because the mech created by Rosen was indeed powerful, but it was also very energy intensive. Although the vibranium energy core had high energy storage, it was also linked to the volume of the vibranium, and the piece of vibranium Rosen originally obtained was still a bit too small. After sparring with Tony for a while, the mech's energy also dropped rapidly, now already below 40%. If he couldn't completely defeat Tony before it dropped to 20%, Pietro would have to retreat. Thus, both sides, with extremely conflicted feelings, arrived above the Stark Industries factory, one after the other. Seeing this, Tony unhesitatingly descended towards the rooftop where the factory's large reactor was located. That guy really is a prophet. Pietro, seeing this, and the huge Stark Industries logo on the distant building, couldn't help but be startled. Because just like the previous freezing tactic, Rosen had also told him before they came that Tony might lead him to the factory. But, haha, Pietro sneered and followed Tony Stark down. What? Our Iron Man finally isn't going to keep running. After landing, Pietro looked at Tony, who was standing not far away, and taunted him, but he didn't immediately step onto the area of the large arc reactor. I told you, I never intended to run. It's just that fighting in the street isn't appropriate, here is just right. Aren't you hostile to me because my family manufactures weapons? Well, this is the former Stark Industries weapon manufacturing factory. I've completely shut it down, so you can tear it down however you want, Tony said, stepping back a few paces, trying to lure Pietro over. Heh, belated hypocrisy. Do you think shutting down the weapon manufacturing department can erase your family's sins? Pietro said with a disdainful laugh. I understand that I can't erase everything from the past, but I will do my best to make amends. Tony said seriously. HMPH, if you live to see tomorrow. Pietro snorted coldly, then strode towards Tony. Happy. Now. Seeing Pietro finally enter the reactor's range, Tony's expression became stern, and he shouted to Happy through the communication. Yes, boss. Happy immediately pressed the reactor's main bypass button. Immediately, a massive energy impact instantly enveloped Pietro's mech. Tony, standing outside the range of the energy impact, breathed a huge sigh of relief. This thing must be finished now, right? As the massive energy impact dissipated, the large mech stood silently on the rooftop, seemingly completely without power. Good job, Happy, I'll definitely give you a raise later. Tony said, promising Happy a bonus through the communication, while walking towards the mech, wanting to see who was inside and also study the mech's energy system. This wasn't plagiarism, after all, this mech was now his spoils of war. However, it was just as well that Melina wasn't here, otherwise, faced with this rather familiar scene, she would definitely tell Tony that he was dreaming. Sir, be careful, the opponent's energy reading is rising. Just as Tony approached the mech, Jarvis suddenly issued an alert. But it was already too late. The large mech restarted, grabbing Tony, who was unable to dodge, in its center. Ha 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 ha, Tony Stark, I really have to thank you. I was worried about not having enough energy, and you just charged me up. Thank you so much. Pietro laughed heartily, looking at the off-the-charts energy reading on the mech's energy display. No, how is this possible? Tony, struggling but unable to move after being caught, had a look of disbelief on his face. He never would have thought that this mech in front of him was inspired by him, built with, and possessed, this characteristic of being able to absorb external energy. Of course, the vibranium, as the energy core, also played a huge role in this. Otherwise, Rosen might not have been able to achieve this characteristic. So now, Tony Stark, who considers himself the most talented man in this world, are you ready to meet your parents? Look at your helpless appearance, I was just as powerless when facing the missiles you created back then. Now, it's your turn. Pietro said with a sinister grin. Ah, let him go. Just as Tony was grabbed by Pietro and struggled fruitlessly. Another figure descended from the sky, directly carrying Pietro away and saving Tony in the process. This figure was, surprisingly, another Iron Man suit. However, it was different from the flashy gold and red paint scheme on Tony's suit. The newly appeared one looked like a semi-finished product, without any paint. Ethan. Recalling the other party's shout just now, Tony understood who had arrived. Unlike the original plot, where Tony built the Mark III and Mark IV for himself, leaving the Mark E idle until he felt severe palladium poisoning spreading, only then did he create a new power source and default to letting Rhodey take it, becoming the Iron Patriot. Now, while completing the Mark III, Tony had prepared a new energy source for the Mark E and actively invited Ethan to try it during testing. So, the current Ethan could actually pilot the suit and had energy backup. However, before this, except for testing, Ethan had refused to use the suit. He knew very well what the suit meant to Tony. It wasn't until today, when he felt Tony was constantly at a disadvantage against Pietro, that he piloted this, idle, suit and, at a crucial moment, saved Tony. That's right, it's me. I did pretty well, didn't I? After knocking Pietro away, Ethan, shaking his head and getting up, said to Tony with a laugh over the comms. Oh, of course, you came just in time. Watch out. Tony was about to exclaim when he saw Pietro, who had been hit, also getting up and firing flames, countercharging towards Ethan. Caught off guard, Ethan instantly became a baseball, achieving a home run. Are you alright? Seeing this, Tony quickly flew to where Ethan had fallen, asking with concern. Oh, I should be fine. Who exactly is this guy? His suit is so much stronger than ours. Ethan lay on the ground for a while before struggling to get up. I appreciate you coming to help me at this moment, but what you just said was really unnecessary. Tony couldn't help but complain. After all, what Ethan said, to Tony, sounded like he was implying his masterpiece was far inferior to the opponent's. This made Tony very displeased. It looks like it's a 2-on-1 now. I never thought the famous Tony Stark would actually have friends. At this moment, Pietro, piloting his mech, approached the two step by step with great pressure. Oh, of course. Is there really anyone in this world who doesn't have a single friend? Tony replied upon hearing this. Well, although he truly had no friends in the past, now he dared to pat his chest and declare that he did have friends. That's right, there are indeed people in this world who have no friends, and that person is me, and all of this is thanks to you. Pietro roared, firing dozens of missiles at both of them. What Pietro said was true, besides his sister, he truly had nothing. Although Tony and Ethan quickly dodged, the fierce bombardment still left them dazed and disoriented. At this point, Pietro also quickly rushed in front of Tony, pinning him to the ground, and began a furious beating. He truly loved this feeling of fist meeting flesh. Seeing this, Ethan quickly stepped forward again, wanting to help. However, Pietro slapped him back with a backhand. Ethan got up again, all his weapons fully deployed, but to Pietro, it was like a tickle. There was nothing he could do. As a prototype and backup suit, the Marquis had far fewer weapons than the Mark IV Tony was currently wearing. Oh, Tony, it seems you still need to figure something out, otherwise, we really don't seem to be able to beat him. After finally repelling Pietro again, Ethan quickly helped up Tony, whose suit was already battered, and said, "Of course, I've already thought of an idea. Ethan, do you want to be a hero?" Tony asked Ethan while checking the extent of his suit's damage. "You say, I do." Ethan replied. "You go to his other side, and we raise our hands at the same time, you understand, right?" Tony told Ethan the battle plan. "Ha, Tony, you're a genius." After hearing Tony's words, Ethan couldn't help but exclaim. "I always am," Tony said proudly. So, when Pietro attacked again, Tony dodged while deliberately positioning himself and Ethan on opposite sides of Pietro. They formed a three-point line configuration. And quickly extended their hands, firing repulsor rays simultaneously, forming an energy convergence point at Pietro's side. Then, it exploded with a roar. But just at this moment, an invisible energy field suddenly appeared, separating Pietro's suit from the explosion point. This prevented Pietro from directly facing the threat of the explosion. At the same time, two water elementals appeared on Pietro's sides, facing Tony and Ethan respectively. Uh-oh, things are starting to get bad. Seeing this, Tony couldn't help but sigh softly. He had seen this move before, the magic girl had arrived. "Tony Stark, you have violated our agreement." Wanda, in a red robe, slowly approached from a distance, saying coldly. "Agreement? What agreement? That was just your unilateral notification, I never agreed." Tony, of course, understood that Wanda was referring to her previous statement about him defeating Pietro. And Ethan's appearance had broken that agreement. But while he understood the situation, Tony would never admit it verbally. "Very well, if that's the case, then you'll never see Pepper Potts again, and you, too, will die here." Wanda said coldly. "What have you done to Pepper?" Tony asked with a cold expression. "Ask in hell." Two magic bolts appeared in Wanda's hand, firing towards Tony and Ethan respectively. And Pietro also flew towards the two again. Round 3 begins. On the distant rooftop, Rosen, in Gale Step state, was leisurely watching this splendid show. And he was recording everything happening with a camera. "It's time to end this. It seems Tony really likes the gift I gave him." After a long while, seeing Ethan and Tony completely lose their resistance, Rosen leisurely put away his camera, and with a flash, disappeared from his spot. When he reappeared, he was already in the center of the battlefield. Thanks for watching.